Welcome to English Audio Stories. What happens when a single rose blooms where no one believes love can survive? Stay with this unforgettable romance, improve your English through natural storytelling, and discover whether love can truly overcome class, fear, and destiny. Title: When Roses Bloom in the Slums, Chapter 1, A Chance Encounter, Part 1. The kingdom of Eldoria was a land divided by beauty and sorrow. On the eastern hills stood magnificent castles carved from white marble, their towers reaching toward the clouds like silent guardians of the heavens. Noble families lived behind towering gates decorated with golden roses, hosting lavish banquets beneath crystal chandeliers, while musicians filled the halls with graceful melodies. Only a few miles away, beyond the river that separated wealth from misery, another world struggled to survive. The district known simply as Black Hollow was a maze of narrow streets, broken rooftops, and weathered brick houses leaning against one another as though they feared collapsing alone. Smoke drifted endlessly from factory chimneys, while hungry children chased one another barefoot through muddy alleys. It was said that no nobleman had ever willingly entered Black Hollow. Likewise, no child born in the slums dared dream of stepping inside the royal quarter. Between these two worlds existed an invisible wall stronger than stone. One side was born with privilege, the other was born with nothing. Lady Isabella Ashford had spent 19 years imprisoned inside luxury. To everyone else, she was the perfect daughter, elegant, educated, graceful, the future bride of some wealthy duke chosen by her father. Yet every morning, as servants carefully brushed her long chestnut hair and selected another expensive silk dress, Isabella felt the same unbearable emptiness. She often stood beside the tall windows of Ashford Manor, staring toward the distant city where ordinary people laughed, argued, worked, and truly lived. Freedom fascinated her more than diamonds ever could. "What are you looking at again?" Her younger cousin Emily stepped into the room carrying a silver tray of tea. "The city," Isabella answered softly. Emily laughed. "You always look at it as if you've never seen people before." "I haven't," Emily frowned. "You see them every day. I see them from here." Isabella touched the cold glass. "I want to know how they live." Emily nearly dropped the teapot. "You can't be serious. I am. The streets are dangerous. I know. They're filled with thieves. I know. There are diseases. Gangs, beggars. I know." Emily sighed dramatically. "You've been reading too many adventure novels." Perhaps she had. Or perhaps adventure had been calling her all along. 2 days later, the annual Spring Festival transformed the capital into a sea of music and color. Street performers danced, children chased balloons, merchants shouted over one another, advertising sweet pastries, handmade jewelry, colorful fabrics, and exotic spices brought by ships from distant kingdoms. Even noble families left their estates to enjoy the celebration. Ashford Manor was no exception. Lord Edward Ashford insisted that the family attend the royal parade before returning home for an evening banquet. The schedule had been planned down to the minute, which meant Isabella already knew exactly how to escape. As the parade reached the central square, hundreds of spectators crowded together to watch soldiers march beneath fluttering banners. The servants struggled to stay close. Perfect. Without making a sound, Isabella slipped into a side street. Her heartbeat raced. No guards, no servants, no strict father. For the first time in her life, she was alone. A delighted smile spread across her face. "So this," she whispered, "is freedom." She wandered without purpose, admiring everything. Fresh bread cooling outside bakeries, artists painting portraits in tiny market stalls, children laughing while chasing pigeons across the square. An old woman selling wildflowers insisted on giving Isabella a single white daisy. "For good luck, my dear. I don't have any coins with me." The woman smiled warmly. "Then pay me by smiling." Isabella laughed. It felt surprisingly easy. Nobody bowed. Nobody addressed her as Lady Ashford. Nobody expected perfection. She was simply another young woman walking through the city. Whores slipped away unnoticed. Eventually she reached streets she had never seen before. The cheerful music faded. The crowds became thinner. The buildings older. She hesitated. Perhaps she had walked too far. Turning around, she realized she no longer recognized the roads behind her. "I think," she murmured nervously, "I'm lost." 3 men watched from across the street. Their clothes were worn, their expressions colder still. The tallest one leaned against a wall, arms folded. "See that girl?" Look at that dress, and those earrings. The third man grinned. She's alone. Predators rarely ignored easy prey. Sabella noticed them only after they began following her. At first, she convinced herself it was coincidence. She turned left. So did they. She crossed another street. Agon. They followed. Her breathing quickened. No, please no. She increased her pace. Behind her came laughter. Losing your way. Miss? She didn't answer. Don't be afraid. We only want to talk. Another voice laughed, and maybe borrow those lovely earrings. Her heart pounded painfully. She broke into a run. The footsteps behind her became louder. Faster. Closer. She turned into a narrow alley. A mistake. The passage ended in a brick wall. Her face drained of color. No. The three men slowly entered the alley, blocking the only exit. One casually spun a knife between his fingers. Another smiled without warmth. Now then, he said, let's not make this difficult. Isabella stepped backward until her shoulders touched the cold wall. There must be some misunderstanding. The tallest man chuckled. Oh, there isn't. We know exactly who you are. One reached toward the necklace around her neck. If you're smart, he whispered, you'll hand everything over. Her hands trembled. She had never been so terrified. Every lesson about etiquette, every dance, every language she'd learned, none of it could save her now. She opened her mouth to scream, but before any sound escaped, a calm voice echoed from the alley entrance. I think, the stranger said quietly, 3 against 1 is rather unfair. The men froze, slowly. They turned around. Standing beneath the fading afternoon sunlight was a young man wearing simple linen clothes dusted with flour. A worn leather satchel rested across his shoulder. His dark hair was slightly messy. His sleeves were rolled above strong forearms marked by years of hard work. Unlike the nobles Isabella had known, there was nothing elegant about him. Yet his calm gray eyes carried a confidence she had never seen before. He looked at the frightened young woman only briefly before returning his gaze to the 3 men. You should leave. The tallest thug laughed loudly. And who are you? The young man answered simply, my name doesn't matter. He took 1 step forward. But if you don't walk away now, his voice remained perfectly steady, you're going to regret it. The alley fell silent. For one brief moment, even the wind seemed to stop breathing. And Isabella realized, without knowing why, that this stranger had just stepped between her and death. Silence settled over the narrow alley. The afternoon breeze carried scraps of paper across the worn cobblestones as neither side made the first move. Lady Isabella Ashford pressed herself against the cold brick wall, her breathing shallow and uneven. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, but her eyes remained fixed on the young stranger who had stepped between her and the 3 men. He looked ordinary. His linen shirt was faded from countless washes, and the sleeves were rolled neatly above his forearms. His boots had seen better days, their leather cracked from years of walking the uneven streets of Black Hollow. A canvas satchel hung from one shoulder, dusted with flour and wood shavings, as though he had just finished another day's work, yet there was something extraordinary about him. He stood perfectly still, not a trace of fear crossed his face. The tallest thug let out a mocking laugh. So, the hero has arrived. His companions chuckled. You should have kept walking, boy. This doesn't concern you. The young man answered calmly. It concerns me now. His voice never rose above a normal conversation, yet every word carried quiet confidence. The man twirled the knife between his fingers. Do you even know who you're talking to? No, the young man shrugged slightly. And I don't particularly care. The answer irritated them. The shortest of the 3 spat onto the ground. Teach him a lesson. Without warning, the thug lunged forward, swinging a heavy fist toward the stranger's face. Before Isabella could even gasp, the young man shifted 1 step to the side. The punch sliced through empty air. The attacker stumbled past him. Using the man's own momentum, the stranger caught his wrist and gently twisted. A sharp cry echoed through the alley. The knife clattered onto the stones. The thug fell to 1 knee. Clutching his arm, Isabella blinked in disbelief. He had moved so naturally that it almost looked effortless. The other 2 men exchanged uneasy glances. Get him! One shouted. This time they charged together. The young man bent down, picked up a loose wooden crate lying against the wall, and pushed it forward. It slid across the cobblestones. One attacker tripped over it, crashing heavily onto the ground. The second barely avoided falling, but lost his balance long enough for the stranger to step behind him. A quick shove sent the man tumbling into his companion. The alley erupted with curses. Neither could stand before colliding with the other again. Isabella watched in stunned silence. She had expected a violent brawl. Instead, the young man avoided almost every blow. He fought with remarkable restraint. Not once did he strike in anger. Not once did he try to seriously injure them. He simply prevented them from hurting anyone. The tallest thug finally regained his footing, his pride wounded more deeply than his body. He pulled a second knife from inside his coat. "You'll regret embarrassing us." For the first time, the young man's expression changed, not fear, concern. His eyes briefly drifted toward Isabella. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. She obeyed without hesitation. The knife flashed in the afternoon light. The thug rushed forward with a furious shout. The stranger waited until the very last moment. Then he sidestepped. His hand caught the attacker's wrist. Another hand pressed firmly against the man's elbow. A swift movement, the knife spun through the air before landing several feet away with a metallic clang. The thug cried out in pain and collapsed onto both knees. Breathing heavily, he realized the fight was over. For several seconds, no one spoke. The three men slowly helped one another to their feet. Their confidence had vanished. The tallest one glared at the young man. "This isn't over." The stranger simply met his gaze. "It should be." The men hesitated, then, grumbling under their breath, they disappeared into the maze of narrow streets. Only after their footsteps faded into the distance did the alley fall completely silent again. Isabella finally released the breath she had been holding. Her knees weakened. The rush of fear that had kept her standing suddenly disappeared all at once. Before she realized it, she stumbled forward. The young man reacted instantly, catching her before she hit the ground. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. She looked up into a pair of calm gray eyes, close enough to notice the tiny scar near his eyebrow, close enough to see kindness where she had expected only hardship. "I'm sorry," Isabella whispered, embarrassed. "I didn't mean to." "It's all right." His voice was gentle now. "You've had quite a frightening afternoon." She nodded silently. He released her as soon as she regained her balance, careful to keep a respectful distance. "You should leave this part of the city. I know." A faint smile appeared on her lips. "I just don't know which way." That unexpected answer caught him off guard. "You don't know?" She shook her head. "I got lost." He couldn't help smiling. "So you wandered into Black Hollow by accident." Black Hollow? The poorest district in the kingdom. Isabella slowly looked around, the cracked walls, the broken windows, the worn-out homes she had barely noticed while running. Only now did she truly see them. "This is where you live?" He nodded. "For as long as I can remember." She hesitated before asking softly, "Is everyone here dangerous?" He looked toward the street where the men had disappeared. "No." After a brief pause, he continued, "Most people here are simply trying to survive." His words lingered in the quiet air. For the first time, Isabella realized how little she truly knew about the world beyond her family's estate. The stories she had heard all her life painted places like Black Hollow as nests of thieves and criminals. Yet the kindest person she had met that day came from the very neighborhood everyone feared. She lowered her eyes. "I judged this place before I ever saw it." The young man smiled faintly. "Most people do." The silence that followed felt strangely comforting. For the first time since she had left Ashford Manor that morning, Isabella no longer felt alone. The young man glanced toward the end of the alley before speaking. "The market is still crowded. If we leave through the next street, you'll avoid those men." Isabella nodded. "I'll follow you." Without another word, he started walking. His pace was steady, never too fast, as though he understood she was still recovering from the shock. Isabella quietly followed a few steps behind, stealing curious glances at the stranger who had appeared like a guardian when she needed one most. The narrow alley soon opened into another street. Unlike the lively avenues near the Royal Square, this neighborhood carried a different rhythm. The buildings were old and weathered. Their brick walls bore cracks from years of harsh winters. Laundry fluttered between windows. Overhead. Children laughed while chasing a handmade wooden wheel through the street, their cheerful voices echoing between the houses. A little girl accidentally bumped into Isabella before quickly stepping back. "Oh, I'm sorry. It's all right." Isabella replied with a gentle smile. The little girl stared at her elegant dress in amazement. You're so pretty. Before Isabella could answer, the girl's mother hurried over. Lily, don't bother the lady. The woman bowed apologetically. I'm terribly sorry, Isabella smiled. Please don't apologize. The woman seemed surprised. Most wealthy visitors ignored people like her completely. Yet this young lady spoke with kindness, without even a trace of arrogance. As they continued walking, Isabella quietly asked, Do children always play in the streets here? The young man nodded. They don't have large gardens. So, the whole neighborhood becomes their playground. She watched the children laughing together. None of them wore expensive clothes. Some were even barefoot. Yet they smiled more freely than many of the noble children she had grown up with. She found herself smiling too. After a few minutes, the delicious smell of freshly baked bread drifted through the air. An elderly baker stood outside a tiny shop, removing warm loaves from a stone oven. The moment he saw the young man, his face brightened. There you are. The baker laughed. I thought you'd forgotten about me today. I wouldn't dare. The young man smiled warmly. I finished repairing your shelves this morning and refused to take extra payment. The baker shook his head. You'll never become rich at this rate. The young man chuckled. I wasn't trying to. The old baker disappeared inside the shop for a moment before returning with 2 small rolls of warm bread. Take them. I already had lunch. Then consider them tomorrow's breakfast. I can't. You can. The old man gently pressed the bread into his hands. No arguments, the young man finally accepted with a grateful smile. Thank you. Only after they had continued walking did Isabella speak again. He seems to like you very much. He likes everyone. No, she shook her head. He trusts you. The young man remained silent. Perhaps she was right. People in Black Hollow had little to give. Trust was often their greatest treasure. After another block, they passed a tiny workshop where an elderly woman struggled to carry a bucket of water. Without hesitation, the young man stepped forward. Mrs. Harper, let me help. Oh dear, the old woman sighed with relief. My back isn't what it used to be. He carried the heavy bucket inside as naturally as if helping family. Isabella waited outside, observing quietly. When he returned, she couldn't hide her curiosity. You help everyone. He looked puzzled. Doesn't everyone? She smiled softly. Not where I come from. He didn't ask where she came from. Instead, he simply nodded. People here rely on one another. If we don't, he glanced around the neighborhood, there's no one else who will. His words settled heavily in Isabella's heart. Back at Ashford Manor, every task had servants. Every inconvenience had a solution purchased with money. Here, kindness itself seemed to be a form of wealth. As they reached a small square, Isabella noticed several children gathered beneath a large oak tree. The moment they saw the young man, they ran toward him. Ethan, you came back. Did you fix Mr. Collins' roof? Will you play with us later? The young man laughed, one question at a time. He crouched so he was at eye level with them. Yes, the roof is fixed. Yes, I'll play after work. And yes, he reached into his satchel. I remembered. The children's eyes sparkled. From inside the worn canvas bag, he produced several small wooden birds. Each one had been carefully carved by hand. Their tiny wings moved when a string was pulled. The children gasped with delight. You made these? I promised, didn't I? Within seconds, they were laughing, comparing their little toys, and chasing each other around the square. Isabella watched the scene in silence. Those toys were simple, nothing like the expensive dolls imported from distant kingdoms. Yet the children's joy was genuine. They're beautiful, she whispered. Ethan smiled modestly. They're only scraps of wood. They're much more than that. He looked at her. They're made with care. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The afternoon sunlight filtered gently through the branches above. Golden rays danced across the cobblestones as laughter echoed through the square. It was peaceful. Far more peaceful than Isabella had ever imagined a place like Black Hollow could be. She turned to Ethan again. You know everyone here. I grew up with most of them, and they all seem to care about you. He shrugged, slightly embarrassed. I've simply lived here a long time. No, she smiled. They care because you've spent a long time caring for them. Ethan lowered his eyes, unsure how to answer. Compliments always made him uncomfortable. After a few moments, they resumed walking. Neither noticed that from the shadow of an abandoned building across the square, 3 familiar figures had quietly returned. The tallest thug rubbed his bruised wrist. His eyes burned with resentment. There they are. One of the others frowned. The boy has company. The leader's lips curled into a cold smile. Good. We'll wait. He watched Ethan and Isabella disappear around the corner. Let them think they've escaped. His voice dropped to a whisper. Tonight, we finish this. The laughter of the children gradually faded behind them. Ethan and Isabella continued along a narrow stone road that wound through the heart of Black Hollow. The afternoon sun had begun its slow descent, painting the rooftops in warm shades of gold and amber. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence was comfortable. It was the kind of silence shared by two strangers who had already begun to trust each other. At the end of the street, Ethan stopped beside a small stone bridge arching over a quiet stream. The water flowed gently beneath it, reflecting the orange sky like liquid glass. He rested one hand on the weathered railing. From here, he said quietly, you can see both worlds. Isabella stepped beside him. She followed his gaze. On one side of the stream stretched Black Hollow, rows of modest homes, smoking chimneys, workshops, and crowded streets filled with ordinary people returning home after a long day's work. On the opposite hill stood the elegant towers of the royal quarter. Ashford Manor rose proudly among them, its white walls glowing beneath the setting sun. For the first time, Isabella saw her home from the outside. It looked magnificent. It also looked very far away. It's strange, she whispered. What is? I've spent my whole life looking toward this side of the city. She nodded toward Black Hollow. I always imagined it was frightening. And now? She smiled faintly. I've seen more kindness here in one afternoon than I expected. Ethan's expression softened. Black Hollow isn't perfect. There are thieves. There are desperate people. There are days when families don't know if they'll have enough to eat. He paused before continuing. But there are also neighbors who share their last loaf of bread, children who laugh even when they own almost nothing, and people who refuse to give up. His words settled gently into Isabella's heart. She leaned against the stone railing, watching the water below. Where I come from, she admitted, people rarely speak honestly. They smile because they should. They compliment one another because it's expected. Sometimes, she hesitated, I don't even know whether they're speaking to me or to my family's name. Ethan looked at her with quiet curiosity. You don't seem very happy, she laughed softly. Does it show that easily? A little, she sighed. Everyone thinks I'm fortunate. I've never worried about food. I've never worried about the weather leaking through my roof. I've had the finest teachers in the kingdom. She looked toward the distant manor. But every day of my life has already been planned for me. What I study, where I go, who I speak to, even, her voice became barely audible, who I'm expected to marry. Ethan remained silent. He had never imagined that someone surrounded by luxury could sound so lonely. After a moment, he said, I always believed people in the royal quarter could do whatever they wanted. She smiled sadly. So did I. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves above them. For a while, they simply listened to the quiet sound of the flowing stream. Then Ethan spoke again. When I was a boy, I used to stand on this bridge. You did? He nodded. I'd look at those grand houses and wonder what life was like over there. What did you imagine? He laughed quietly. I thought everyone had endless feasts. No one ever worked, and every room had a fireplace. Isabella couldn't help laughing. Some of that is true. I knew it, but not everything. She looked at him with genuine curiosity. What about now? What do you dream about now? Ethan took a slow breath before answering. I want to open a workshop. A proper one. Somewhere children can learn woodworking without paying, so they can earn an honest living. He smiled modestly. It isn't a very grand dream. It is, Isabella said immediately. It's a beautiful one. He glanced at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. No one has ever called it beautiful before. Then they've never really listened. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Neither looked away immediately. For reasons neither of them understood, the distance between them no longer felt as wide as the distance between their two worlds. A flock of birds crossed the evening sky. Isabella watched them disappear beyond the horizon. I wish... She stopped herself. Ethan waited patiently. What do you wish? She smiled, almost embarrassed. I wish people weren't judged by where they were born. The words lingered in the cool evening air. Ethan lowered his gaze. So do I. Neither of them noticed how naturally the conversation had begun to reveal pieces of their hearts. They had met only an hour earlier, yet somehow, speaking to one another felt easier than speaking to anyone else. The silence that followed was no longer awkward. It was peaceful, comfortable, as though fate itself had slowed the world around them. Finally, Ethan looked toward the darkening sky. It'll be sunset soon. You should head back. Isabella nodded reluctantly. I suppose I should. She wasn't ready to leave Dot, but she knew she couldn't stay away forever. They began walking again. Following the road that led toward the brighter districts of the city, Dot hidden behind the broken wall of an abandoned warehouse. 3 shadowy figures watched every step. The tallest thug clenched his fists. They're heading toward East Gate. Perfect. His companion smirked. No guards after sunset, and no witnesses. The third man reached beneath his coat, revealing the glint of a freshly sharpened blade. This time, he muttered coldly, the boy won't be so lucky. From the road ahead, Ethan and Isabella continued talking, completely unaware that danger was following only a few streets behind Dot. The last rays of sunlight slipped below the horizon. One by one, the street lamps flickered to life. Long shadows stretched across the cobblestones. And somewhere within those growing shadows, revenge was quietly waiting. Will Ethan be able to protect Isabella once again as night falls? Or will the 3 ruthless thugs finally get their revenge? And what will happen if Isabella's true identity is revealed? Can a noble lady and a poor young man from 2 completely different worlds overcome the dangers that lie ahead? Don't miss the next episode of English Audio Stories to discover what fate has in store for Ethan and Isabella.